It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Philips 328E1CA. The OSD is controlled by pressable buttons and they're located on the underside of the bottom bezel. There's also a little white power LED. It glows white when the monitor's on and it flashes white when the monitor enters a low power state, so signal to the computer is lost. There isn't an option to disable the power LED in the OSD, but I didn't find it distracting. It is fairly bright, but it's quite small, so if it really does bug you, then I would just suggest covering up with black tape or something like that. If you press the first button, that allows you to access the Smart Image Game presets of the monitor. There are various different options here. I don't like most of these, but I don't really generally like presets. I prefer manual control. Gamer 1 and Gamer 2, they're useful because they allow you to recall various different sets of settings, and I use that myself. So I use Gamer 1 as my main test settings. Gamer 2 is something I've used in the evening for relaxing evening viewing. It has low blue light active, and I'll go through that shortly. Low blue mode, they're useful as well, and I'll go through this in the main menu system. Smart uniformity, that's a uniformity compensation mode, and that's explored in the written review. FPS, racing and RTS, to be honest I don't really like them. They just upset the image in various different ways. You can see with the RTS mode there's a little box towards the top left of the screen. That's actually something you can employ if you like on the racing, FPS, Gamer 1 and Gamer 2 settings, possibly some of the other presets as well. But you can disable this if you prefer as well, even if you're in the RTS setting. It's called Smart Frame, so it's just a Smart Frame setting there. You can change the size of it, so you can make it larger if you prefer. You can actually fill the whole screen with it if you'd like. But the point in this is you can manually adjust the brightness and contrast. That's digital brightness. It doesn't affect the backlight brightness or anything like that. So it's a digital brightness control, contrast control, horizontal and vertical position. You can change that as well as the size of the box. The point is to just highlight an area. The reason it's there on the RTS setting by default is simply because you might have a map on an RTS game which you want to highlight because it's so important. If you press the second button along when you're not in the main menu system, you can cycle the input used by the monitor. So you can select one of the HDMI 2 ports or you can select DisplayPort. The third button along allows you to adjust the volume of the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm audio jack. And then the fourth button along is the main menu system, and there's a power button next to that as well. I don't need to tell you what the power button does, I'm sure you can work it out. But the main menu system is laid out in Philips' usual modern style, so there are various different sections. Low blue mode, that's a low blue light setting, actually 4 different low blue light settings for the monitor. So setting 1 is the weakest, setting 2 is stronger, setting 3 is stronger again, setting 4 is stronger again. These are explored in the written review, but essentially what they do is they lower the colour temperature significantly. They significantly reduce the power of the blue colour channel, so the intensity of blue light coming from the monitor. Some of them also slightly dim compared to default, but you can always adjust the brightness manually with these settings active, and I would recommend doing that to minimise blue light output. But it's useful in the evening in particular, and the hours leading up towards bed, because you don't want stimulating blue light. It can disrupt sleep hormones. I mean, I'm not here to preach that to you too much, but some users will be well aware of how useful low blue light settings can be. This monitor certainly has some which you can use if you want to. Next is input, so that's exactly what I showed you earlier. It allows you to change the input used by the monitor. There's picture, and that allows you to adjust the main settings of the monitor really, so that you can adjust the brightness, the contrast, sharpness. The sharpness you can change in increments of 10. Brightness and contrast as usual, single unit increments. I consider 50 to be optimal for sharpness as it happens, but you can adjust that according to preferences if you'd like. Smart response, the pixel overdrive settings of the monitor. Faster I consider optimal, but these are all explored in the written review and indeed shown in the video review. Smart contrast, the dynamic contrast setting of the monitor. That's explored in the review as well. Smart frame, I've gone through that before. Various gamma settings on the monitor, 2.2 being the default. You can also set it to 1.8, 2.0, 2.4 or 2.6. Just be aware that these don't necessarily correspond to the exact average gamma. The measured gamma on my screen was a bit different to what these settings said, but it was fairly close overall, so really just use them as a rough guide to your gamma. Pixel orbiting, and what that does is it shifts the image by 1 pixel and then shifts it back every now and then. It does it very occasionally. I haven't really noticed it doing it, to be honest, so it's very subtle when it does do it. And this is just to reduce image retention. I haven't had any particular issues with image retention on this model, but to be honest, Philips monitors almost always have this feature, so it's there again on this model. Overscan, that's grayed out unless you're using some old legacy system where it's actually relevant. So if you're using an older games console and you need to overscan the image so it appears to sort of flow off the screen, if you like, then you can do that. It isn't relevant to PC users or modern games consoles. I'm now going to talk about smart size. I've got the game Battlefield 5 running so I can talk about this feature, and that's because the feature relates to the scaling or interpolation process used by the monitor when it's displaying non-native resolution. So I've got this running at full HD, that's a non-native resolution for this monitor. If you've got the panel size option selected, panel size 31.5 wide, 16 by 9, that's the only option there for panel size. All of the pixels will be used, so the whole of the screen will be illuminated regardless of the resolution you've selected, and an interpolation process is used to fill out the image. If instead you select 1:1, that's 1:1 pixel mapping mode, that will only use the pixels called for in the source resolution. So for the full HD resolution, you can see here, you just get a small image in the center of the screen, but there's no loss of sharpness or clarity because only 1900 by 1080 pixels are being used. So whether you'd actually like to use this given the huge loss of screen real estate, I'm not sure exactly how large that is diagonally. I think it's around 20 inches. I keep forgetting this, and I haven't measured it recently, but it's really very small compared to the overall size of the monitor. If you select a different resolution, so let's try 2560 by 1440, so the WQHD resolution. It's got the 1:1 pixel mapping mode enabled again, but you can see because there are more pixels used, you get more of the screen filled up. But I do explore the interpolation process used when you're actually using the full panel in the review, and as I mentioned there, it's actually quite decent, so don't feel you have to use the 1:1 mode. The panel size mode is quite decent. There's also aspect. This is a bit of a weird one, to be honest. What this is supposed to do, it's supposed to look at the aspect ratio of the source resolution you're using, in this case 16 by 9. It's supposed to match that, but it's supposed to use just some interpolation without upsetting the aspect ratio. We could probably see even in the video, it's actually all really squashed up. It doesn't look natural at all. It doesn't seem to quite work properly. And this is something I've noticed with Philips monitors before. This aspect setting's a bit weird, to be honest. And it's perhaps a bit clearer on the desktop with the icons and stuff, but it just looks a bit distorted. It's not quite perfect. But as I mentioned, the panel size, and you're using the interpolation both horizontally and vertically, I think really that's the preferred setting for most users. So just to quickly show you, I'm actually running at the native resolution now, and I've got the aspect mode selected. You can see things are just squashed together. The wallpaper doesn't look right. The icons look a bit squished that way. So it just doesn't quite do the right thing in my opinion. You can see that Smart Size is grayed out now. That's because I've got Adaptive Sync active in my graphics driver, and you can't use Smart Size with Adaptive Sync at the same time. If you see this grayed out when it shouldn't be, or in fact you can use it when you shouldn't be able to use it, turn the monitor off then on again, and it will re-establish whether Adaptive Sync is being used or not, and the setting will be either grayed out or not appropriately. Next, there's audio. This allows you to adjust the volume of the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm jack. There's a standalone mode, and what this does is it allows you to get audio from the monitor even if there isn't an active video feed, so you're not getting a video signal. You can still have the audio playing. You can mute the integrated speakers or anything connected to the 3.5mm jack, and you can control the source used for the audio, so either DisplayPort or HDMI if you've got HDMI connected, or the audio input instead, which is the 3.5mm jack. Next, there's colour. So you can change the colour temperature used by the monitor. 6500K is the default, 6500 Kelvin. You can have it warmer or cooler. 5000K is a low blue light setting. It's actually one that I like to use for my own viewing comfort in the evening. The reason for that is that whilst it's not quite as effective as the low blue mode setting, if you reduce the brightness it's still very effective, and it also has a more balanced look to the image because it reduces the green channel as well rather than keeping that strong. So the image just looks more neutral to my eye and I prefer it. You can read a bit more about that in the written review in the calibration section. There's also a native setting, and all that does is it keeps the colour channels at 100, their native value, and that gives you maximal contrast but doesn't give you any colour adjustments, and you're likely to find that things are a bit off in terms of colour balance with that setting. You can manually change the red, green and blue colour channels as I've done here for my test settings. sRGB is not an sRGB emulation mode on this monitor. It's actually exactly the same as just setting it to 6500K. You might notice the image is different, and that's because different brightnesses are assigned to these different colour temperature settings. So all it's actually doing there is reverting to the default brightness, which is much higher than the one I was using before, if that makes sense. Language, you can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. OSD settings, you can change the horizontal and vertical position of the OSD on the screen. You can activate a transparency effect or increase the transparency effect if you like. OSD timeout, which I really should have increased before starting the video, and that is how long after the last button press before the menu will automatically disappear. Or you can just press the back button a few times to manually get rid of it. Finally, there's setup. That has a resolution notification, and what this does is it just gives you a message on the screen if you're running at a non-native resolution to remind you that you should be running at the native resolution for optimal performance. So if that message is bugging you and you frequently use a non-native resolution, just turn that off or keep that off. DisplayPort version 1.2 for the full capabilities of the monitor. If you're using an older system that doesn't support that, then you can select 1.1 for compatibility purposes. There's an option to reset everything to the factory defaults, and there's an information section which shows you a shortened version of the model code for the monitor, the serial number, and the refresh rate and resolution being used currently. So that's all there is to the OSD on-screen display menu system of the Philips 328E1CA. Be sure to check out the full review on pcmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.